Good afternoon to those tuning in from India and the Asia market. Good evening. Well, good morning from me in the UK. I'm still in the UK at the moment because of travel restrictions. Welcome to the latest edition of Legal Tech with Provagil. It's a new initiative that we started a couple of months ago at IDEX Legal in partnership with the Provagil team, bringing challenges and discussions around what role legal tech is playing in the in-house world in the India market. So we've had some great conversations to date, and today we look forward to a much more sectoral discussion where we're going to be talking about legal tech and the banking and finance industry, and really looking at the impact and potential technologies played on the sector over the decades, and and the kind of challenges that are still there to be solved from legal tech. And we're really delighted to have a key industry veteran joining us for this discussion. We have Mohit Shukla from Barclays, and Mohit's been around a while. So he first took a leadership position back in 2001 at Citi. Well, so he was at Barclays. He rose to kind of managing director level at Barclays. He's been at Citi. He's been very instrumental, in the kind of global banking arena within India of creating legal functions from scratch and modeling them, to work as real business partners. And one of the first early adopters of understanding the role of in-house counsel for the business. And he's applied that methodology, like I said, across Citi and now at Barclays. He's a member of the Asia Pacific regional leadership team for legal and their compliance management team too. And what he does within his role is to manage the legal function in India, which comprises of 10 lawyers, and a compliance function, which has over 70 compliance professionals, as well as dealing with cross-border transactions, regulatory matters, which is no easy thing in India, and the implementation of policies relating to legal challenges. And what Mohit's great at is really looking at what he identifies his kind of methodologies as his challenges are best dealt with rather than avoided, and they come in all forms and shapes, which we know, but each one of them only adds to what you can learn from, and all of it aggregates, gives you the tools, and you need to deal with the new ones that come your way. And a very apt saying, given the last couple of years in particular. I mean, Mohit would have been through many challenges in the banking industry, but the last 2 years has been one that has really kind of thrown all of us kind of into a new territory that we've not been able to deal with. Joining Mohit, we have Shashwat Sikka, who's the co-founder of Provagil, which is a great league. Well, they're beyond startup now, so they've been around a few years, and they've become already one of the key names in the market, providing good legal tech solutions within India. They work with a lot of corporates, also law firms, providing solutions, and have over the last few years really been deep diving into solving key challenges for the industry. So I'm really glad to have both Mohit and Shashwat joining us for this discussion. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks, Vikas.
Great. Mohit, we're going to start with you. So you've been around a couple of decades as a GC, and especially within the BFSI community. And when you first came in, I remember you mentioned that you commissioned tech vendors when you're at Citi to build a litigation reporting system to give you eyeballs on what the position was. Because for you had no idea, like, how are you going to solve some of the big litigation issues when there was no kind of system in place. And from those days to now, much has evolved. So just from your kind of GC perspective, what have you seen have been the notable areas of growth where legal tech has played a kind of key role within the BFSI sector?
Oh, definitely, absolutely. I think technology certainly has come into space, a significant amount of space for itself within legal functions. And you're right. In the couple of decades that I've seen it grow, what it has significantly contributed to is in various forms and shapes, depending upon which service provider has looked at it from which perspective, and who in the industry has really looked to adopt it and embrace it. litigation definitely has been one of the key beneficiaries and litigation management with that in terms of technology being incorporated into the in-house practice. And certainly in terms of litigation management, litigation awareness, the technology platform has certainly gone beyond beyond the in-house. What you see today in terms of how all-encompassing it has become is when you look at what we see in terms of the databases and the websites for our various courts, and complementing that is what most in-house teams have also put into place in terms of litigation management. The second space that it has made a big difference in certainly is the regulatory space, which is definitely part of what legal looks at very closely. Most in-house functions in their advisory role for legal definitely look at legal interpreting and advising on regulation for the enterprise. So regulation management and how technology is used in that space has also developed very significantly. The third piece that we've actually seen it take root is in terms of purchase order management and law firm engagement management. So that's another big space where litigation has definitely made big strides. There are other things, bits and pieces that it is inevitably creeping into, and in a good way, and very welcome. But I think one of the things that we're looking at more broadly is how blockchain technology is coming into its own in terms of trade finance, for example, right? And how trade finance platforms are looking at what you can do to minimize, in fact, almost eliminate paperwork and try and make sure that trade finance in all its various facets, in all its various steps, becomes seamless and is actually looking to derive great benefits from blockchain technology for one. We've also seen a number of third-party platforms come into the market, essentially to enable the purchase of receivables. That's a big industry in terms of how capital is deployed, released, and redeployed in the financial system. So when a financial institution generates a loan, and it is essentially linked to receivables which are periodic, very often through securitization or assignment, you will take it off your book, and then you open up that space for further financing opportunities, right? So the whole system of receivables purchases, for example, has seen a number of platforms come up across the world in terms of enabling the interface between buyer purchaser, with the intermediary playing an important role. So you're seeing a lot of development in terms of how technology is making great strides into this space and throwing up not only interesting opportunities, but very, very interesting challenges, because as we look at many of these developments today, which are divorced from, say, the management of legal issues, and you get into the transactional space, you're also looking at many, many perspectives in terms of enforceability, in terms of making sure that evidentiary value is retained. Dispute management becomes an important part of that as well. And as I speak of dispute management, I'm sure you're very, very aware of how much of an impetus online mediation, online dispute resolution is now, getting. So it's a very interesting panoply, and I think it attaches very significantly to the management of legal issues. And as in-house counsel, when we look at legal issues, they're not single window. They're not focused on any one particular aspect. They're enterprise-wide, right? And the linkages are very significant depending on the kind of business you do, in terms of what it throws up as advantages for a number of aspects of the entire enterprise, from beginning of cycle to end of cycle. So technology does play a very, very significant role and there's a lot more space for it to actually embrace and actually come into. A lot of it is work in progress at this time.
Yeah, I know when we had Navneet from Cisco on the last webinar, and he was giving us a kind of throwback to the early days of legal tech, to the 70s, where he said Waters Kluwer's invented essential litigation management tool. And we're talking 50 years ago. We're still talking about the same kind of challenges to be solved today. I know one of the stories you kind of mentioned when we were chatting earlier was when you first got into Citi and you had all these issues to kind of solve from a litigation point of view, and not having a kind of dashboard or understanding of what exactly is going on in the business. But and what you did back then was, I think, very rare for kind of an in-house counsel in India to kind of look at, right, we need to figure this out and we can't be doing it manually. So how did you get to that kind of thinking that, right, we've got to have some kind of dashboard reporting tool, and then go and do that process of building a tool for the business? How did you do that? And how did you suddenly realize you need to do that because for the business?
Yes, no, absolutely true, and it's essentially it's actually addressing the situation. So a very venerable institution and a very significant financial institution, and when it decided that it wanted to proceed with developing an in-house function for South Asia, I just happened to be the first person who stepped into the portals as general counsel for South Asia, and it was literally a role which then had me looking to not only develop the function for South Asia, but actually then to look at developing also the procedures and processes that would make the function effective and efficient. And one of the big things that attach to any institution of size is appropriate litigation management, because litigation management is all about not only knowing what you have, but also within what you have, getting to understand what you need not necessarily continue with as litigation. There are many pieces of litigation which by sheer inertia just not only get initiated, but then continue for a long time, because in the ordinary course of litigation management, you're looking at a docket and saying, okay, we initiated this case, or somebody initiated a case against us on a particular date, and then it continues through its momentum and life cycle, in the courts. You get dates, you get heard, some infructuous dates happen, some dates of of value happen when you get heard. It comes to a judgment time, either you appeal or they appeal, or matters closed, depending upon what the situation may be. Sometimes it can take a long time. And through that cycle, you also have to have the ability to assess what's worth carrying on with and what's not worth carrying on with. And unless you have a system to look at your entire repository, you will not know. You will not be the wiser. And unless you have a complete system, you do not have the confidence to be able to actually supply very significant financial information for the system, right? In terms of what contingent liability do you carry, what requires reserves, how much should you be assessing in terms of balance sheet, in terms of what it means, in terms of material litigation and non-material litigation. Do you need notes to accounts in respect of certain types of litigation? Unless you have a picture which is complete across the various verticals, and the various verticals in a country like India could take you from debt recovery tribunals to high courts, to consumer fora, to metropolitan magistrate courts, to other criminal courts. There's a plethora of proceedings in various fora, and you will just not get the right picture in terms of what your litigation portfolio is about unless you know what there is. And the only way you can manage that in an institution of significant size with a running business, where litigation then becomes par for the course, is a system. And you can try running it manually, you can try running it over Excel sheets, you can try running it over documents, but you will fail because it is just not efficient enough, and it is just not foolproof enough in terms of a system being able to throw data up at you across its various aspects. So you need a system. So when I stepped into that role, and it was all me and all by myself, and people started asking me questions about litigation, I quickly realized that actually running around the country by myself, asking for input data over Excel, Word, email, just wasn't going to work. And there was nothing at that point of time that I was aware of that actually provided you, off-the-shelf solution. So we actually had to tap into one of our technology vendors and ask them to develop a system for us, and that was basically everything about UAT testing and, what fields you need and what works and what kind of data cuts can you get from it, because regulatory reporting is also an aspect for a regulated financial services player. You get requests for all kinds of cuts of information, depending on what particular aspect they may be looking at to assess. So you have to be able to slice and dice as well in terms of what you want. You can't just say, here's my whole repository, take it and make what you will of it. So you need to be able to splice, dice, cut data, get smaller subsets of information. You need a system, right? And that's what actually, set that journey off in terms of actually being able to deploy that and make it a sensible repository for all of this. Because without all of this, there is no way you can hand to heart say, I can tell you that this is the information you need.
I mean, that's a great point. And I think part of City's kind of luck was that, you were a GC at the time that was kind of way ahead of, most. I mean, we didn't even have GCs really back then when you came in that kind of role, and to then have a GC that really understood the business challenging and trying to figure out a solution to report to them. I mean, we're still grappling as an in-house community with that concept today, where, and I know if you have, I have great conversation with Prasanna about, there are very few GCs in India still, because they're essentially heads of legal, because the role is very different. But, I mean, for you to have brought that in, I think was pretty phenomenal actually back then, and City very much benefited from that. Shashwat, you'll understand what Mohit's talking for, and you'll also because you work with so many corporates and you've looked at the BFSI sector, you'll see he's one of the rare ones that understands tech, what tech is useful for. So how have you seen that kind of journey kind of evolve? And it's probably one of the reasons you entered the market. Essentially, you could see the inefficiencies with regards to challenges to be solved by business, but no reporting tools. So how have you seen that develop?
Yeah, so I think again, incredible, right? At that point in time, thinking about a system. I mean, so these are still things that today, again, are not specific to the industry, because we practically work with all industries, right? So it is still today that I have to sit across the table and make people realize why reporting is important, why you should automate your regulatory reporting, why you should have a system for doing this rather than having a person dedicated to it every 1 week in a quarter, making sure that the regulator gets the right set of numbers, right? We still have to put in a lot of effort, and again, it is a little bit of very industries, but see, again, and I come from a very different era or a vintage, right? I mean, so sense that what we've seen the last 7 or 8 years, right? I mean, and how things have been evolving, right? I mean, so there are two forces at play, right? So the one force is just how technology is becoming integral to all businesses, right? It's not even legal. It is the entire, whatever business you are in today, right? If you're not using technology meaningfully, you are exposing yourselves to risks that are going to come for you very soon, right? So today, let's say Proclay is a really small company, right? I mean, we are still a tiny company, and within our framework also, right? If let's say we had started this company 15 years back, right? If let's say we had to raise a debt of 5 crore rupees, right? Or $1 million, right? That process was nearly impossible for a company our size, right? But today, right? And again, if it had happened, right? And I'm talking about unsecured debt. If it had happened, it would have taken a really long time, right? For us to be able to build those relationships and convince those bankers that we are building a worthy enough business for them to take a risk at us, right? But today, you have a company like us can go in the market and raise 2 crore rupees in 3 days. That is the speed at which that is being dispersed, right? And it's just how things are moving in the industry, right? So Now imagine this, right? So every other function in the bank has to make that work, right? For the debt to hit my bank account in 3 days, a lot of processes are today being automated, a lot of information is being analyzed, which people earlier would prepare a case and do, and now it is a set of systems that does, right? Now, where we are working with legal teams, right? And again, legal is an extremely important part of this whole change, because you are involved from the right, from the very beginning of that process, right? So the entire KYC process falls under the legal's domain, right? I mean, how that domain is changing, how today, so I got an Amazon credit card recently, right? And I personally was surprised they issued me a card in 30 minutes, right? Everything happened over a video conferencing, the KYC and everything, and 30 minutes I had the card, right? I had a virtual card which I could start using on a website, right? So, and if you look at that entire process of how that analysis happened, right? The whole KYC was virtual. That entire domain is legal and compliance, right? I mean, it is to the credit of how India is growing and how we don't credit ourselves enough. The regulatory framework is changing to sort of accommodate these things, and it carries on. This till the last part of collections and getting the money back, right? Everything at every step, legal is involved, right? So I think meaningful progress has been made in the last 5 to 7, 10 years that I have closely observed this industry. I think Mohit would attest to it.
I think Shashwat. Just frozen, Shashwat. What we're going to do while he comes back, Mohit, I mean, he's talking about the evolution of tech, key role playing, and I mean, as a side story, I can completely understand. It's amazing how much legal tech has evolved, especially in the finance industry. That, I mean, his example of getting a credit card so quickly. I mean, you've got so many. I mean, I did something similar last couple of weeks ago when I managed to set up a business account in the UK within about 5 days from scratch. And I remember my time in India when I was doing that 10, 12 years ago, it would take me weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's where, what he was alluding to is the fact that the backbone, the mainframe that is used by businesses today in the financial services sector has really speeded up things in terms of just how quickly processing can be done. And it would be anachronistic not to do so because, on the one hand, in terms of payment infrastructure, for example, technology platforms that enable payments. And even if they are, mainframe payment systems, like for India, for example, in India, the RTGS and NEFT, and the NEFT systems, and SWIFT enabling, payments, they happen in a moment, right? So when you have to facilitate the fact that payments themselves can happen so quickly in the financial world, the mainframe that supports those and enables those payments can't afford to take 10 days or 15 days to process the backbone behind what those payments represent. So if you need an account, you need a facility, the whole infrastructure with respect to enabling KYC, to enabling risk assessment, to enabling documentation, and then opening the account or crediting the facility to that account to enable those payments cannot be sitting there and saying, I will take 6 months to do, or 15 days to do, or 20 days to do, right? So when you look at it, when you step back and look at the entire enterprise, end to end, and all of the enabling parts, anything that then eventually represents a logjam for you, whether it's legal documentation or whether it's verification or whether it's any of those elements, risk assessment even, before you decide to greenlight something. If that is manual and that is manually done and intensive and needs people to be able to devote that amount of time, because at any given point of time, all of us are looking at many things, right? It's becoming increasingly difficult for people to be able to devote a set amount of time to one task. It's just not that world anymore.
Yeah.
So it just speaks to the fact that you need that technology enablement to be able to do all of those things that you need done, which you don't need to manually do. And when you do it manually, you will only be a showstopper, right? So to be able to do all of that and seamlessly go from pocket to pocket to pocket of the enterprise to enable the end delivery, you have to look at technology seamlessly, and you have to look at technology for each part of what that enterprise represents.
Yeah. Have you obviously we've all been living through the pandemic the last couple of years. I mean, as I said, you're one of the rare cases that really gets legal tech and kind of what it solves for the business. But generally, the Indian legal fraternity was well known for being quite averse to using tech, and saying, no, we can't use tech, because we've got to have our documentation, centrally located or, physically done, and very manual, and it was cheaper to have people looking after files than, spending money on tech. So have you? So obviously, you're not typical of the kind of, stereotype of how the industry's, really had to look at tech over the last 18 months. But have you seen any impact on the kind of thought process, within, from an in-house point of view, even the business point of view, when we're looking at the legal side of how legal tech can be used by the business?
Legal tech, I think, can be used in terms of a business enabler in a multitude of ways. And let's look at a very simple example, right? Let's not look at something very complicated, for the purposes of a discussion to begin with. But let's look at a very simple example in terms of what the COVID-related work from home situation, led to in some ways. For example, you could have everybody is dispersed, right? So you don't have the benefit of teams working together. You don't have the benefit of teams working in close proximity. You don't have the benefit of people, tapping one another on the shoulder to ask them, hey, what do I do in this situation, right? Yeah. Just building a very simple tool, which you could just dub it as Ask Legal, right? And you enable it on a platform, and you help so much of the baseline information flow that business teams may require or other functional teams may require, saying, how much do I stamp this document for? What stamp duty does this document attract? What's a base power of attorney for this purpose, right? If I'm signing X document, what do I need to be careful about in terms of ABCDE requirements, right? You set up a simple repository with all of the what do I do in such and such scenario questions. You're enabling business people at the baseline to not have to scratch their heads and run around and ask, obviously legal teams are much smaller than the business teams, and the business teams are many, right? So you also have to prioritize, and you juggle, conflicts of time and prioritization. And if you keep people waiting to address such basic questions, you're preventing them from going forward.
Yeah.
With step 1, step 2, step 3, where things can get more complex and require more intervention. So if you're able to just do a what if tool or what do I do tool, which is basically enabled on a system and is enriched by the evolution of questions to be able to then throw up answers. You've done a lot in terms of just baseline comfort with people taking away from that and at least beginning their work, instead of having to be dependent on 4 or 5 or 6 people in legal for the country who may be doing other things, right, for other businesses and may not be able to come back to you immediately.
Yeah.
So that's a very basic construct, but it's a very powerful construct, and that's enabled by technology, right?
Yeah.
And it's very, very compelling when you are dispersed and far flung, and really don't have recourse to just walking up to somebody and saying, "Help me with this,"
Yeah.
right? Another thing that we looked at in terms of trying to see is that an interface, because this becomes very important in a situation like the one the pandemic represented for us, which is people not being able to sign documents, right? Because they're not there, right? And if you look at a jurisdiction like ours, and there are many like ours, where any signature, documentation signature necessarily involves stamp duty as an assessment, and stamp duty by practice and by requirement is paid before a document is signed, right? To make sure that's enforceable and it has evidentiary value. So, stamp vendors are not available because everybody is away, working from home, and people are not there to sign. So how do you look at a platform that can converge for you with the ability to take the benefit of e-stamping and digital signatures, right? So it's something that gained impetus and became, a must-have during the lockdown and during the constraints that the pandemic represented, because people were not available, and you can't stop everything because people are not available. And you can't work on a massive volume of deferment saying, okay, let's do it now in this way and we will remediate later, right? Because that throws up legal risks eventually for you down the line, and you don't know how long it's going to take you to normalize, right? So you look at a platform that gives you that ability to be able to converge these two very essential elements of transactional go forward, right? And that's something that technology came to the fore to help with in a very, very live situation.
Yeah, you're right. And I think they're two almost like, simple but really powerful examples of actually where legal tech has played a crucial role. And you're right, like a lot of businesses did struggle during that transition in the early lockdown.
Yes.
Like, how are you signing documents? And all the documents are in the office, and how, a lot of transactions, did stop. So I think it's a great example of, legal tech doesn't have to be this kind of complex AI, ML kind of dominated kind of theory, but actually there's ways that, simple tech can, simple solutions using tech can have really powerful kind of impacts on the business.
Absolutely, yes.
So we've, you've talked about lots of examples of, how legal tech, from when you got in at Citi, from a kind of understanding the litigation situation there to, now just about almost kind of, a dynamic FAQ system for the business and, e-signatures, so great examples of challenges, solutions to business challenges. But what are still some of the big business challenges, that you're seeing that, that frustrate you, and keep you up at night as a GC, thinking, these problems can be solved, but, legal tech has to come in and solve these for you so you can get a good night's sleep?
Yes. I think when you reflect on it, technology can make things very, very simple for you. At the same time, there is a dynamic that associates, in particular with significant transactions, with large transactions, there's a dynamic. And, the world is small, but it's not small. And you need to connect, particularly when you're doing, say, multi-party transactions, for example. You need to connect with a lot of people in many places around the world, right? Mm-hmm. And the world uses email because that's obviously the most convenient piece of architecture that is available for rapid communication, and everybody hoping that everybody's reading everything that they're getting, and everybody's hoping that, everybody who gets whatever can respond quickly. And so that in the tight timelines of a fast moving world that we see today, where expectations And some of them are ironically fueled by technology, right? Because people say you're connected, you're wired 24/7, everybody is available, so things can move at speed, right? So sometimes in very complex, very large transactions as well, there is an expectation from the market that they be delivered quickly, and that entails some fairly intensive 24/7 email interaction across multiple parties, right? Negotiating, discussing a very, very complex documentation for a transaction. And the one thing that I think any lawyer or even a transactor who's working on something like that would sometimes wonder, looking at the pace at which such a massive amount of information is being exchanged, are we getting it all together, right?
Yeah.
And are we sure we have it all down? Are we sure we've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's? Because there's so many people. There can be 100, 150 people, right, giving you information. Some of it is massive, some of it is small but important. And there's a lot of information coming in because people are thinking, right? And they're thinking through a question, or they're thinking through a challenge, and they're iterating or articulating what they're thinking. So sometimes you can, on one question, there can be 30 emails in the space of 3 minutes, right? And it's overnight, it's through the day, it's through the weekend, right? As the transaction gathers steam and as it goes towards closure, it gets very frenzied. And there's that question mark that always sometimes plays at the back of the mind, saying, have you got it all? Have you got it all? Is it actually there? And there'll be a slew of documents, right? There'll be 10, 15 documents associated with a transaction, and they're all inevitably 60, 80, 100, 120 pager documents, right? So when you look at that kind of a situation, you say, what really finally does the sanity check on this, right? In terms of, have we got it all? Have we stayed true to everything? All of these documents across them, in terms of cross-references within them and across them, articulate and reiterate things as well. So if you change something in one place, have you got that everywhere consistently? Is it going to basically then at the end of the day present what it should present in terms of it being harmonious, congruous, and making sense, right? So I'm sure it does, but it is a very, very frenzied, sometimes very harrowing experience saying, at the end of the day, is it all there, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you look at it and you think about it, saying, does technology have a solution for this kind of thing? Because this basically represents a significant piece of work on a daily basis and through the year and over the years in terms of what financial institutions do. And eventually, this has to stack up to not only enforceability, it has to stack up to analysis that went into the structuring of the transaction, and it has to stand up eventually to litigation challenges as if it comes to that, right? And there are conditions precedent, there are conditions subsequent that attach themselves to transactions of this size and significance. They have a life cycle, right? So when you look at that in its totality and you think about it saying, okay, across houses, across transactors, across legal functions, across law firms, is there something that is a technology solution that can actually, work to everybody's benefit and perhaps makes this whole process simpler for everybody by just being able to hold it together? So I think that's one of the things that certainly, when you look at it, it's bespoke activity. It is dependent on a lot of, human oversight and human attention. And you wonder what parts of these can actually then be enabled by legal technology to make it simpler and maybe more, maybe less time consuming for everybody as well.
Yeah. I mean, a great point, and no pressure, Shash. What we're going to bring you on to that.
No, this sounds really exciting. I mean, so what I hear is really exciting, right? I mean, end of the day, if you're doing something valuable, you have to solve hard problems, right? You can't be solving easy problems and saying that, so no, so while Mohit is right? I mean, we're still at a stage where we're trying to solve, because we're still trying to solve problems of scale, right? Where, you have such a huge scale available. So the problem that Mohit talks about is a little bespoke, but again, if you look at the globe as a whole, then this is also happening at scale, right? I mean, there are multiple people across, financial institutions across the world who are dealing with these problems daily, right? And with the the type of deals that they're doing, the size of those deals, the kind of parties involved, it can be really, really nerve-wracking, right? When you are going through such a transaction, right? I mean, I can totally imagine that, right? Now, so Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And why I find this really interesting is this, right? So today, if you look at this transaction, right, you're probably doing $100 million transaction, and what is happening? The technology stack for this, right? Let's look at this, right? From a legal standpoint, the technology stack is your email and Microsoft Word, right? That's the stack, right? I mean, a lot of that discussion, and probably there are some internal systems for approvals and notes being shared, but largely, the lawyer is spending probably hundreds of hours, probably more, on making sure that all the communication that is there on the email, everything that has happened in one document moves to other document, because there's a web of 15 documents which are interconnected in nature, right? And then you have to think 2 years down the line, you have to think what happened last year, because you're not doing this transaction for the first time with this company. There is an ongoing existing relationship. How does that get impacted, right? So there are a lot going on, right? And frankly, I mean, if you want to set up a system doing this, we're not at that pace, right? Technology hasn't gotten there. But what can we do, right? I mean, what can we do as service providers when we think about problems of these nature, right? So one is, I think one piece which is fundamentally broken is where all of these stakeholders are collaborating, right? The collaboration framework is broken. You can't have two protocols running parallelly, right? So there is conversation over email, there is conversation on the document, right? The document and the communication platform has to be the same. It has to be a living document, right? The solution has to solve for security, it has to solve for confidentiality, it has to solve for n number of things, and then make sure that everything that happens, right? You have a single framework where all of this is getting around, so that you don't have the mental, you don't have to put the mental bandwidth for checking what discussion happened and whether that translated to things actually getting implemented on the document, right? Now, if you can bring it on the document, if you can make those documents living documents where collaboration can happen, multiple people can collaborate, that is one step toward it. There's still a lot of legal acumen that is required to, understand the complexity of the deal, but at least you're not dealing with multiple systems, right? So today we are not even at a stage where there's a reliable system that can solve for that, right? To beat Microsoft Word at their game is a really hard problem, right? I mean, Microsoft Word has done it over decades, right? But that is a problem that is ripe for solving, right? That is a problem that we hear from so many people, right? And if technology can enable that, then that becomes a game changer to start with, right? Now, that is one, right? And the other area which I look at, and again, this is something that we talk about a lot inside ProWakil at least, right? So now let's say you've structured this deal, you've gone through this 3-month process of negotiations and reworking those documents, right? Can you implement simple machine learning AI tools to just do hygiene checks, right? So things like, Mohit said, right, you did all the hard work, right? And then one small minor detail was missed out because you solve such hard problems during that process that the smaller ones did not get your attention, right? Or one small mistake happened, right? So I think technology systems are there that they can catch the small problems for you, right? They can catch the hygiene problems for you, right? Now, and all of this is still hard, and I'll connect this back to what Mohit was mentioning about the pandemic, right? So one thing that the pandemic taught us, right? I mean, what it was really was, it broke us out of our inertia, right? I mean, see, any change, any implementation is going to be hard. It is going to be time consuming. It will probably lead to some destabilization in the short term, right? You will face issues because you will have to devote time to developing something that is not going to pay off in the immediate term, right? So when the pandemic hit us, everybody realized that we have to do this now. There's no other option. You can't. So, but what has happened today is we sell contract management systems, and everybody wants e-stamping. It is something that the industry expects the vendor to have, right? If you don't have it, then they're not interested. This was not the case 1.5 years back. Nobody even talked about e-stamping, right? People were like, give me a system, I'll put in my documents, I have my templates, a few approvals, we're good, right? Beyond that, you have a fancy system. Frankly, we don't have the time to implement it, right? But today, everybody realizes that, that is a criticality, right? So the kind of challenges that Mohit is talking about are again in that zone, right? I mean, there will be early adopters who will say, okay, fine, this is a problem too close to my heart. I want this to be solved. I want to work with, companies who want to solve these problems, and solutions will come out of it, right? I mean, and while we speak, I know that there are people working on these challenges, people working on these problems. So I am really excited, right? I mean, that's what keeps us going, right? I mean, all of these things, are great to hear, right? I mean, we need problems in the world to solve, right? I mean, unless and until there are going to be problems, we're not going to have a lot of cool things coming out of it.
Yeah,
that is true. Absolutely, yes.
Do you want to give any specific examples, Shashwat, or like the kind of challenges you're being able to solve at the moment for? I mean, if from this sector, super, but where maybe an in-house counsel has come in and think like what Mohit did a couple of decades ago with his tech vendor about the litigation side, but where you can say, look, an unsensitized kind of legal user was trying to figure out business challenge, but where you've been able to come in and support them on that journey.
Yeah. So one thing again, and this is coming from personal experience, right? So two areas where we've been, so I think, so personally, if you ask me as a legal tech, somebody in the legal tech space, what are the things that we are exploring on ground? I think so we've been on the litigation and dispute resolution space for some time. So that is an area that we have a fairly good understanding of. Contracts, another big area that, we deal with, and, there's a lot of work that we are seeing happen there. Another area is compliance. We're still, very early in compliance. We don't do much of it, but that is another area where massive demand on ground. I mean, and, I've had a few discussions, one, in fact, with Mohit as well, where he had mentioned a lot of things, right, which were very interesting, right? So these are the areas where a lot is happening, right? So personally, if you ask us, right, because we started off in the litigation space, today in this industry, we are seeing incredible amount of effort going into automating and streamlining collection side of the business, right? I mean, again, and that is very dispute centric view, right? Because tech is, you go to a bank today or an NBFC or a fintech, there you would find probably 25 tech vendors working with them all the time, right? So there's a lot of action there, right? But we have seen debt collections as a space which is again going through a massive overhaul, right? You have ODR, your courts are going digital. You have regulatory changes that are enabling digital dissemination of information, digital delivery of notices. A lot of things are changing, and there are multiple ways to reach the consumer today, right? Earlier you needed the PIN code, and there's a 15 days it will take for that letter to reach him, and so you have to give that time, right? Today that communication happens through multiple channels which are instant, right? So the whole process has to be redesigned, refigured. So while the fintechs and the young companies have that advantage that they're taking a fresh stab at it, the larger institutions, the banks, they are also redesigning those. And we're working with some of those banks and institutions in helping them redesign processes and implement a lot of tech in that space. And again, the pandemic has really pushed us there, right? Because they realize that feet on street and people on ground is still a risky proposition, right? I mean, if something happens tomorrow where people can't be on ground meeting customers, then what happens, right?
Yeah.
So big way, right? That is happening. In contracts, I think Mohit mentioned, right? I mean, we all went through 3 months of no contract signing, right? So we all know that contracts need to be digital.
Yeah. Okay, I think we kind of get to the wrapping up stage.
I think one of the
Mohit, back to you, because obviously,
Mohit wanted to add something, I think.
no, I think one of the questions that I see in the Q&A is effectively about I think lack of awareness and lack of perhaps exposure to technology for a part of the legal fraternity. I think that's absolutely that's very relevant because while one may argue that there is still a significant amount of space in the legal infrastructure in the country which is not technology driven and therefore not technology enabled, it's getting there. And inevitably, at some point of time, including from the perspective that the country is very, very clear in its path that digitization and technology are going to matter and are going to increasingly become part of the ecosystem, it is very necessary for people to become aware of how legal tech can work and how one and what one needs to do to be safe and secure as well, right? While you're dealing with legal technology and data. So I'm sure any formal framework will in any case deal with all of those safety features and provide all those safeguards in terms of making sure that communication channels are secure, making sure that data is protected. But I think it just adds one level of complexity in terms of familiarity. If it's lacking, then you could make mistakes, right? And you could end up breaching sensitive aspects of data. You could end up, creating malware for yourself in your own systems as you set up your technology-driven practices. So it is, I think, one of the things that, Shashwat, you could think about is as you go about implementing technology solutions for the legal fraternity is also to run a module, informing and educating people about what's the right way of doing it.
I think Mohit, you're absolutely right, and we end up talking to a lot of young lawyers who are very, very keen, right? I mean, the new crop today really understands this, and in my view, I think it has to be ingrained into the curriculum, right? I mean, so for instance, I studied economics, right, in college, right? But I went to a technology school, right? I went to a university where I was surrounded by engineers. So today, while I studied economics, I still can appreciate. I don't find it overwhelming, right? But with a lot of lawyers, what we've seen is because you're in a circle where you don't really discuss those things so often, you can at times find it a little overwhelming, right? And I think that needs to change. I think a lot of from an education system standpoint, I think tech is something that has become so universal that cross collaboration between different university curriculums where you have experts coming in, you have some initiation into just getting to know the world of tech a little bit more, right? And I think that's necessary, right? And as necessary as studying calculus in school and trigonometry in school, right? I think so computer science will become that for us, I think, for a lot of things going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think great point, especially for the kind of generation below as well. I mean, what they're doing today, even the 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, that generation, what they're doing today is so much more powerful than even what they're playing on systems and hardware is more powerful than what was there 60 years ago that sent man to the moon. So I mean, so it's incredible whatever they're going to be doing in a decade or two when they hit the job markets and the problems they're going to have to solve. As we kind of wrap up, Mohit, just more because it's festive time and people are going to head into the kind of Xmas and New Year's holidays. What would be your wish? If Shashwat and the legal tech fraternity could play Santa for this year, what would be your wish as a gift from them?
That's a wonderful question, and I think when you step back and look at the ecosystem in its totality, and you look at how multi-branched and multi-armed it is, right? And perhaps I look at it from the context of rule making more than anything else. because rulemaking for the legal fraternity, and not just the legal fraternity, the legal fraternity is what spends most of its time in assessing rulemaking. But rulemaking impacts everybody. It impacts the economy, it impacts business, it impacts ease of doing business, it impacts everything, right? I think just looking at the whole ecosystem in terms of transactional work, assessment of issues by the judicial arm, and going back to where the two mesh with rulemaking in the executive arm, right? A lot of what we see in terms of different interpretations, which kind of sometimes have the potential of confusing enterprise, right? Because, and at the end of the day, that's fair. People, A will have a view, B will have a view, C will have a view. Ultimately, we're all informed by, what we're looking at, the context in which we're looking at it, and therefore what we make of it when we interpret it. But sometimes dissonance and disharmony in interpretation and application, right, ends up perhaps taking up unnecessary time in the judicial forums, because then they have to unravel it all. It stymies enterprise because people have to pause to think about what to do when things are not clear. Is there some way technology can harmonize interpretation such that it is consistent and harmonious? And, when different arms of administration, different arms of government look at the same issue, and different courts and fora look at the same issue, there is something that technology can help them, in their assessment with, so that they can come to the right conclusion with all of the appropriate input, right? Nobody is looking to influence people in the wrong way. But can technology really enable assessment to be harmonized and consistent so that it is the same thing in terms of legal certainty, right? For enterprise and for the country, right? Because ultimately our goal is to move forward and not get stuck in confusion.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that?
Yeah, but obviously, Shashwat, you've got a week till Christmas to deliver this.
I think we'd much rather help enterprises navigate that tricky line, because working with the governments and again in this regard, working with the parliament and ministers, that's a really hard one, right? I mean, it's very difficult to convince the government to do certain things, right? I mean, we've been racking our brains. We've been, luckily we've worked with a lot of government departments and institutions, but it is really hard, right? I mean, and I'm talking about simple things. What Mohit is talking about are really complex, long-term issues, right? I mean, things which are fairly complex in nature. Getting people to understand them is a hard one, right? Is a hard one. I think we are still in that zone where we say, right, that India grows despite of its politics, right? And we will make our efforts to make sure that, whatever the environment be, we still have the tools and the means to navigate it, right? That's where, humble people like us can come in. I think that's beyond my pay grade, the question that was asked.
So let's seed that thought with you, Shashwat, and take it forward as an evangelist.
All right, super. Well, I think Meenakshi mentioned that's an excellent wish, Mohit. So I think you've got others probably going to jump on the bandwagon of good wish for the technology sector.
Yes.
I want to thank both of you because it's been a great discussion. I mean, 1 hour's we were expecting less, but 1 hour's flown by in terms of the role legal tech's played to date, and also some of the big challenges that are yet to be solved by the tech industry. But I think Shashwat was mentioning earlier when we were chatting, you were saying like look, in the next decade, a lot of this stuff will be pretty plain vanilla, but there's a lot of work to be done. But the way things are moving, in terms of what technology can do, it's moving so fast. So I think Mohit's wish, will come true pretty soon. In the next few years, maybe not next week, but years it's getting there. But thanks again, Mohit, for being a great panelist, giving your kind of decades of wisdom, to us in the audience, and Shashwat as well, providing the kind of the kind of solutions that tech is able to deliver right now, and what you're working towards as well. So thanks both of you gentlemen.
My pleasure. Thank you, Shashwat, and thank you, Vikas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohit. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.